Did you really think I'd survive out there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as snow melted off my coat and pooled onto their hardwood floor. My son didn't answer, but my daughter-in-law did. She crossed her arms, leaned against the kitchen counter like she owned the entire world, and said, "You weren't supposed to come back." That was the moment I realized something had been planned long before that storm ever hit. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because what happened to me that night changed everything I thought I knew about my own family." The snow had started just after sunset. At first, it was gentle, the kind of snowfall that makes everything look peaceful, almost forgiving. By 8 p.m., it had turned into something else entirely. Thick, relentless sheets of white swallowing the streetlights, burying the sidewalks, silencing the world. I remember standing by the living room window, watching the storm build. The glass rattled softly with each gust of wind. The weather report had warned it would be the worst blizzard of the season. Dangerous conditions. Limited visibility. Travel not advised. I turned from the window and looked at them. My son, Daniel, sitting at the dining table, scrolling through his phone. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, clearing dishes with sharp, deliberate movements. The house felt different that night. Not louder, not quieter, just colder. And it wasn't because of the storm. "Dinner was good," I said, trying to fill the silence. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it didn't quite belong in that room anymore. Daniel nodded without looking up. "Yeah." Rachel didn't respond at all. She carried the plates into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile with a rhythm that felt almost intentional. I stood there for a moment, unsure of where to place myself. For nearly 3 years, this had been my home too. Ever since my husband passed, Daniel had insisted I move in. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," he'd said back then, his hand warm around mine at the funeral. "Come stay with us. As long as you need. As long as you need." I held on to those words longer than I should have. "I think I'll turn in early," I said finally, forcing a small smile. "Storm-like. This, best to stay warm." That's when Rachel stopped moving. It was subtle, just a pause. A stillness that settled over the room like a warning. She turned slowly, drying her hands with a towel, her expression unreadable. "Actually," she said, her tone light. "Too light. We need to talk first." Something in my chest tightened. Daniel finally looked up, but not at me. At her, as if waiting for permission. I felt it then. That quiet shift. The kind you don't notice until it's already too late. "What about?" I asked. Rachel folded the towel neatly and placed it on the counter. Every movement precise. Controlled. "It's about living arrangements," she said. I blinked. Living arrangements? Daniel cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Mom, we've been meaning to bring this up for a while." A while. The words echoed in my mind. I glanced between them, searching for something, warmth, hesitation, anything that felt like family. But all I saw was distance. A quiet agreement that I had somehow missed. "I don't understand," I said slowly. Rachel stepped closer, her smile polite but hollow. "This house is getting a little crowded," she said. "And with everything going on, we think it might be time for you to find somewhere more suitable." Suitable. I let the words sit there between us. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, as if the storm itself was trying to warn me. "I've lived here for years," I said. "I don't take up much space. I help with groceries. Bills, that's not the point." Rachel cut in, her voice sharper now. "We need our privacy. Our own life. Our own life." As if I wasn't part of it. I turned to Daniel. "Is that how you feel?" For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe even guilt. Then it was gone. He nodded. "Yeah, Mom. It's time. Time." The room seemed to tilt slightly, like the ground beneath me had shifted. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up when he was sick as a child. The jobs I'd worked to keep a roof over his head. The years I'd spent making sure he never felt alone. And now, where exactly am I supposed to go? I asked quietly. Rachel didn't hesitate. "There are plenty of senior communities," she said. "Or apartments. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out." Simple. Clean. Detached. Like I was just another problem to be solved. I glanced back toward the window. The snow was falling harder now, thick and blinding. The street outside had disappeared completely. "It's not safe to go out tonight," I said. "We can talk about this tomorrow." Rachel shook her head. "No," she said. We've already waited long enough. Daniel stood up then, finally meeting my eyes. But there was something missing there. Something that used to be there when he was younger. Mom, it's for the best. For the best. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something they didn't realize I had already begun to see. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't about space. This was a decision they had made together long before tonight. I'll need a little time, I said. Rachel checked the clock on the wall. You have until morning, she replied. Morning. Outside, the storm roared louder, as if laughing at the idea. I looked at my son one last time, waiting, hoping, for him to say something different. To step in. To remember who I was to him. He didn't. He just stood there, silent. And in that silence, I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Not shatter. Settle. Like a truth finally finding its place. I see, I said softly. I turned without another word and walked toward the hallway. Each step steady, measured. Behind me, I could hear Rachel exhale, as if relieved. I didn't go to my room right away. Instead, I stopped by the front door. I placed my hand on the knob and felt the cold seeping in from the other side. The storm was at its worst now. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet thought began to form, one I didn't fully understand yet. If they were so eager to push me out into the cold, then maybe there was something about this house they didn't want me to stay long enough to discover. I tightened my grip on the handle, and for the first time that night, I wasn't just hurt. I was curious. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. Not slammed, not forced, just closed. And somehow, that made it worse. The cold hit me immediately. It wrapped around my body like something alive, sharp and unforgiving. The wind howled down the street, carrying needles of snow. That stung against my face. Within seconds, my fingers went numb, even inside my gloves. I stood there on the porch for a moment, my suitcase at my feet, trying to understand how I had gone from sitting at the dinner table to standing outside in the middle of a blizzard. At 68 years old, in my own son's house, I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped off the porch. The snow was already several inches deep, swallowing my shoes with every step. The driveway had disappeared. The streetlights were nothing more than blurred halos in the distance. Everything felt erased, just like I had been. I didn't cry. I thought I would. Any normal person would. But the tears didn't come. Maybe they had already been used up over the past 3 years, ever since my husband passed. Ever since silence started replacing conversations. Ever since I began to notice that I was no longer being included, only tolerated. I made it to the sidewalk slowly, dragging the suitcase behind me. The wheels kept catching in the snow, forcing me to lift it inch by inch. My breath came out in short, visible bursts. There was nowhere specific to go. No plan. No destination. And that was the part that settled deepest in my chest. Not the cold, not the wind, but the realization that they knew that. They knew I had nowhere else. Which meant this wasn't just a decision. It was intentional. A gust of wind nearly knocked me off balance, and I grabbed onto a mailbox to steady myself. My hands were shaking now, not just from the cold. I needed somewhere warm. Somewhere close. The nearest place I could think of was a small diner about half a mile down the road. I had been there a few times with my husband years ago. It stayed open late. If I could just make it there. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase and kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The snow kept falling, thick and relentless, covering my tracks almost as soon as I made them, erasing proof that I had ever been there. By the time I reached the diner, my legs were aching and my coat was dusted white from shoulder to hem. The neon, open sign flickered faintly through the storm, like a promise barely holding on. I pushed. The door opened and stepped inside. Warmth hit me all at once. So sudden it almost made me dizzy. The smell of coffee, something fried on the grill, the low hum of conversation. It all felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. A young waitress looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening slightly as she took in my appearance. "You okay, ma'am?" she asked gently. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure that was true. "Just needed to get out of the cold," I said. She didn't ask any more questions. Just gave me a small, kind smile and gestured toward a booth. "Sit wherever you like." I slid into the corner seat, setting my suitcase beside me. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around the mug of coffee she brought over a few minutes later. "On the house," she said quietly. I looked up at her, surprised. "Thank you," I replied. She nodded and walked away, giving me space. I sat there for a long time, staring into the dark surface of the coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, everything was still. And in that stillness, my mind began to drift backward. Back to the house. Back to the past 3 years. Back to all the moments I had dismissed. The small things at first. Rachel changing the locks on the garage without telling me, saying it was for security. Daniel switching the account passwords, handling all the bills himself. Less stress for you, Mom. Conversations that would stop the moment I walked into the room, followed by smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. At the time, I told myself it was normal, that I was imagining things, that families go through phases. But sitting there in that diner, with melting snow soaking into the edges of my coat, it didn't feel like imagination anymore. It felt like a pattern, a quiet, careful distancing, step by step, until tonight. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle into my chest. That's when something else surfaced. A memory, faint at first, but sharp enough to make me pause. About a week ago, I had walked past the kitchen and overheard Rachel on the phone. She hadn't seen me. I just need a little more time, she had said. Once everything's finalized, it'll be ours. Ours. At the time, I assumed she was talking about something small. Maybe refinancing. Maybe a purchase. I didn't think much of it. I didn't ask questions. That was my mistake. Now, sitting here, those words felt different. Heavier. More deliberate. Once everything's finalized. Finalized what? I set the mug down slowly, my fingers tightening around the ceramic. Another memory followed. 2 days ago, Daniel had asked me, casually, if I still had the old documents from when my husband and I first bought the house. I might need them for tax purposes, he'd said. I told him they were in the filing cabinet upstairs. He had nodded, smiled, thanked me, and I hadn't thought twice about it. But now it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like preparation. Careful, quiet, planned. I leaned back in the booth, my heart beating a little faster. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Clarity. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted something tied to me. Something I still had control over. And whatever it was, they were close to getting it. Outside, the storm showed no signs of slowing. But inside me, something had shifted. The confusion was fading. The hurt was still there, but it was changing shape, hardening into something steadier, colder, more focused. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. There was one person I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Someone my husband had trusted. Someone who knew things I might have overlooked. My fingers hovered over the contact for a moment. Then I pressed call, because if they thought pushing me out into the cold would end this, they didn't understand who I used to be, and they definitely didn't understand who I was about to become. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Margaret. His voice was older than I remembered. Slower, but still steady. It's me, I said, keeping my tone even. I hope I'm not calling too late, Harold. A brief pause. Then, for you? Never. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. There was something grounding about hearing a voice that hadn't changed, not like everything else in my life. I need to ask you something, I said. Of course. I glanced around the diner. A couple sat 2 booths over, quietly sharing a plate of fries. The waitress was wiping down the counter, humming to herself. Ordinary life, continuing. Meanwhile, mine had just been pushed out into the snow. Do you remember the paperwork from when we bought the house? I asked. All those years ago, the way it was set up. Harold didn't answer right away. I could almost hear him thinking. That depends, he said slowly. What exactly are you asking? I tightened my grip on the phone. I'm asking if everything was as simple as it looked. Another pause. This one longer. He understood more than I was saying. He always had. Margaret, he said carefully, did something happen? I looked down at my hands. The slight tremble was still there, but it wasn't from the cold anymore. They asked me to leave tonight, I said. In the middle of the storm. Silence. Then, a quiet, controlled exhale. I see, he replied. That was all. No shock. No outrage. Just understanding. And Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask me why. He just said, where are you right now? At a diner on Maple Street, I replied. About half a mile from the house. Stay there, he said immediately. Don't go anywhere else tonight. There was something in his tone, firm, precise, that made me sit a little straighter. I wasn't planning to, I said. Good, he replied. Then a brief pause. Listen carefully, Margaret. I need you to answer me one thing. I waited. Did Daniel ever ask you to sign anything recently? Anything at all? Papers, forms, even something that looked routine. I thought back. The past few weeks. The small conversations. The moments I hadn't paid attention to. No, I said slowly. He asked about old documents. Tax-related, he said. But I didn't sign anything. Good. Harold repeated, this time quieter. That's very good. A chill moved through me, but not from the storm outside. What is it? I asked. He didn't answer right away. I could hear papers shifting on his end, a drawer opening, the faint scratch of something being pulled out. When your husband and you bought that house, he began. You remember it wasn't a standard purchase. I frowned slightly. We had some legal structuring, yes. You handled most of it. I did, he said. Because your husband insisted. I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. Insisted on what? Another pause. Then Harold spoke, slower now. He wanted to make sure that no one, not even family, could force you out of that home. Not under any circumstance. The words settled heavily in my chest. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he continued, that the house was placed under a protected ownership structure. You are the primary beneficiary, Margaret. Not Daniel. Not anyone else. I blinked. That doesn't make sense, I said. Daniel always said the house would eventually be his. Yes, Harold replied calmly. Eventually. Under very specific conditions. Conditions? My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. What kind of conditions? The kind that haven't been met, he said. Silence stretched between us. In the background, I could hear the low hum of the diner, the clink of dishes, the quiet rhythm of a normal night continuing without interruption. But for me, everything had shifted. They can't legally remove you, Harold said. Not without your consent. Not without going through you. I swallowed slowly. Then why would they? Because they either don't understand the structure, he cut in, or they're trying to get around it. Get around it. The phrase echoed in my mind. Rachel's voice from a week ago. Once everything's finalized, it'll be ours. Daniel asking for documents. The sudden urgency tonight. The storm. It wasn't random. It wasn't emotional. It was timing. Carefully chosen. They thought if I left, I said quietly. Yes, Harold replied. They may believe that if you abandon the property, it strengthens their position. Or at the very least, removes you as an obstacle. Obstacle. That's what I had become. Not a mother. Not family. Just something standing in the way of ownership. I let out a slow breath. And if I don't leave? I asked. You already did, he said gently. At least, from their perspective. I closed my eyes briefly. He was right. As far as they knew, I was out in the storm. Gone. Vulnerable. Alone. Exactly where they wanted me. Margaret, Harold continued, his tone shifting slightly. There's something else you need to understand. I listened carefully. The structure your husband put in place, it doesn't just protect you. A pause. It gives you authority. I opened my eyes. What kind of authority? The kind that allows you to make decisions about the property. Immediate ones. My heartbeat slowed. Not from calm, but from focus. Are you saying, I began. I'm saying, he replied, that if you choose to act, you don't need their permission. The words landed differently. Not as comfort, but as clarity. For the first time that night, the situation wasn't something happening to me. It was something I could move within. Control. Even if only a little. What would you suggest? I asked. Harold didn't hesitate this time. I suggest you don't go back tonight, he said. Let them believe whatever they want to believe. I glanced toward the window. The storm still raged outside, thick and relentless. And tomorrow? Another pause. Tomorrow, he said, we take a closer look at everything. The documents. The current status. What's been accessed, what hasn't. Accessed. A thought flickered through my mind. Harold, if Daniel went through the filing cabinet, he wouldn't have everything, Harold said firmly. Not the critical pieces. Those were never kept in the house. Relief moved through me, but it was brief. Because this was not even close. They thought they had time, I murmured. Yes, Harold agreed. And now they think they have an advantage. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. Outside, the storm howled against the glass. Inside, something much quieter was taking shape. A realization. They hadn't just made a move tonight. They had revealed their position. And in doing that, they had given me something far more valuable than sympathy. They had given me information. Get some rest if you can, Harold said. We'll talk again in the morning. I will, I replied. But as I ended the call and set the phone down on the table, I already knew. Sleep wasn't coming. Not tonight. Because the woman they pushed out into the snow wasn't the same one sitting here now. And by morning, they were going to find that out. I didn't leave the diner that night. Not because I couldn't, but because, for the first time, I understood that walking away too quickly was exactly what they were counting on. The waitress came by a few times, refilling my coffee without asking. At some point, she brought me a bowl of soup and set it down gently in front of me. You need something warm, she said. I nodded. Thank you. I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't need to. Some things don't require explanation. I stayed in that booth for hours, watching the clock above the counter move slowly past midnight. Then 1, then 2. Outside, the storm softened, but it didn't stop. Inside, my thoughts became clearer, sharper. By 3 in the morning, I wasn't replaying the hurt anymore. I was replaying details. Small things. Quiet things. The kind you only notice when you stop feeling and start thinking. Rachel's tone over the past month, more confident than usual. Daniel avoiding certain conversations. The way they both kept saying, it'll all work out soon. Soon. That word again. I picked up my phone and opened my notes. Something I hadn't done in years. I started writing. Not emotions. Facts. Dates. Conversations. Fragments of memory. 3 weeks ago, Rachel insisted on handling mail. 2 weeks ago, Daniel asked about original house documents. 1 week ago, Rachel on the phone. Once everything's finalized, tonight, sudden demand to leave. Immediate. No delay. I stared at the list. It didn't look like chaos. It looked like a timeline. A plan moving toward a deadline. And I had been removed, right before it reached that point. I leaned back slowly, letting that realization settle. They didn't just want me out, I murmured to myself. They needed me out. There was a difference. A very important one. Because if my presence didn't matter, they could have waited. A week. A month. Even longer. But they didn't. They chose the worst possible night. A blizzard. Limited movement. Limited witnesses. Limited options for me. That wasn't cruelty alone. That was strategy. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now. Completely steady. Around 4 in the morning, the diner grew quieter. The couple had left. The cook disappeared into the back for a break. Even the neon sign outside seemed dimmer. The world had slowed down. And in that stillness, something else surfaced. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. My husband, sitting at the kitchen table late one night, papers spread out in front of him. I had asked him why he was being so careful with everything. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, because someday, you might need protection from people you never expected. At the time, I laughed it off. I thought he was being overly cautious. Paranoid, even. But now, sitting alone in a diner at nearly 5 in the morning, I understood. He wasn't protecting the house. He was protecting me. From this exact moment, I exhaled slowly and reached for my phone again. This time, I didn't call Harold. I opened my messages. Scrolled to Daniel's name. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, I considered sending something simple. Are you okay? Can we talk? Something a mother would say. Something soft. But I stopped. Because that version of me, the one who asked gently, who waited patiently, who accepted silence as an answer, that version had been standing in the snow a few hours ago, and no one had come to open the door. I locked my phone and set it back down. No messages. No warnings. No explanations. If they had a plan, then so did I now. And mine didn't require permission. Around 6 in the morning, the sky outside began to lighten. Not bright, just a faint shift from black to gray. The storm had slowed to a light, steady fall. The roads were still buried, but the wind had calmed. The world looked different in the morning. Cleaner. Quieter. Like it was pretending nothing had happened overnight. I stood up slowly, my body stiff from sitting for so long. I paid the bill, even though most of it had been covered already. As I reached the door, the waitress called out softly, "Hey." I turned back. She hesitated, then said, "Whatever you're dealing with, you look stronger than it." I held her gaze for a moment. Then I nodded. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. Because she was right. Not stronger than everything, but stronger than I had been yesterday. I stepped outside. The cold was still there, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't something happening to me. It was just weather. I adjusted my coat and looked down the street. The house wasn't far. Less than 10 minutes on foot. I could go back right now. Knock on the door. force a conversation, demand answers. But I didn't move, because rushing back would only put me back into their version of the story, where I was reacting, where I was emotional, where I was already defeated. No, I turned in the opposite direction instead, toward the bank. It would open in an hour, and when it did, I wouldn't be the woman they had pushed out into the storm. I would be the one walking in with questions, with authority, and with something they didn't realize they had already lost: control. The bank didn't open until 9 a.m. I got there at 8:15. Old habits. When you spend most of your life being the one who waits for answers, for people, for things to get better, you learn that showing up early is the only part you can still control. The building stood quiet under a thin layer of snow. The parking lot hadn't been cleared yet. Just a few tire tracks cutting through the white, leading nowhere in particular. I stood across the street for a moment, watching it, breathing in the cold morning air, letting everything settle into place. 12 hours ago, I had been standing outside my own home, holding a suitcase, wondering where I would go. Now, I knew exactly where I needed to be. When the doors finally opened, I walked in without hesitation. The warmth inside was familiar, controlled, predictable, very different from the chaos of the night before. A young man behind the front desk looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with someone about a property account," I said. My voice was calm, even, preferably someone who handles long-term asset structures. He blinked, just slightly, not expecting that level of specificity. "Of course," he said quickly. "Let me check who's available." I nodded and stepped aside. Everything about this moment felt different from the night before. There, I had been reacting. Here, I was initiating. A few minutes later, a woman in her 40s approached me. Professional, composed, the kind of person who didn't miss details. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. I inclined my head. "Yes. I'm Karen. I manage private accounts here. Please, come with me." She led me into a glass-walled office and gestured for me to sit. "How can I assist you today?" she asked. I placed my purse on the table and looked at her directly. "I need to review all documents and access related to a property under my name," I said. "Specifically, I want to know if anyone else has attempted to retrieve or modify information tied to that property in the last 2 weeks. Her expression shifted, just slightly. More focused now. "Of course," she said. "Do you have identification with you?" I handed it over without a word. She reviewed it, typed something into her computer, and then paused. "Just a moment," she said quietly. I watched her eyes move across the screen. Reading. Processing. Then she looked back at me. "Mrs. Whitmore, this account is flagged under a protected structure." "I'm aware," I said. She studied me for a second, as if reassessing. "Very few people are listed with any level of access here," she continued. "And from what I can see," she turned the screen slightly toward herself again, scrolling. "There was an inquiry made 2 days ago." My heartbeat didn't change. "By whom?" I asked. She hesitated, not out of reluctance, but caution. "A request was made under your son's name," she said. "Daniel Whitmore." There it was. Not suspicion anymore. Confirmation. "What kind of request?" I asked. "He asked about transferring certain documents related to ownership," she replied. "Specifically, he inquired about requirements for initiating a transition of control." Transition of control. I let the phrase settle. "He didn't have authorization, I assume," I said. Karen shook her head. "No, the request was denied. This structure doesn't allow changes without your direct approval and presence." Of course it didn't. My husband had made sure of that. "Did he try anything else?" I asked. She checked again. "No formal actions beyond the inquiry," she said. "But," she paused. "But, he seemed insistent," she added carefully. Asked several follow-up questions. Tried to understand if there were any exceptions. Exceptions. I almost smiled. Daniel had always been persistent as a child. If he wanted something, he would keep asking until he found a way around the answer. But this wasn't a toy. This wasn't a small request. This was control over a home. Over stability. Over me. I folded my hands neatly in front of me. "Thank you," I said. "That's exactly what I needed to know." Karen nodded, but she didn't relax. "If you don't mind me asking," she said, "is there a concern about unauthorized attempts moving forward?" I met her gaze. "Yes," I said simply. She didn't ask for details. Good, because I wasn't here to explain. I was here to act. "In that case," she continued, "we can add an additional layer of notification. Any inquiry, any attempt to access information, you'll be informed immediately. Do that, I said. And, she added, if you'd like, we can also prepare documentation for immediate enforcement of your ownership rights, should any dispute arise. Immediate enforcement. I nodded once. Prepare it. She began typing again, more quickly this time. Efficient. Focused. Just like I needed to be. As she worked, I sat back slightly and let the final pieces fall into place. They hadn't thrown me out because of space. They hadn't done it because of privacy. They had done it because they thought they were close. Close to gaining control. Close to removing the last obstacle. Me. And when they realized they couldn't do it through paperwork, they tried to do it through pressure. Through timing. Through force. But they made one mistake. They assumed I wouldn't look deeper. That I would accept what happened at face value. That I would leave and stay gone. I stood up as Karen finished preparing the documents. Everything will be ready shortly, she said. We just need your signature when you're comfortable. I nodded. I'll review it now. She handed me the folder. Clean. Organized. Precise. Very different from the quiet manipulation waiting back at that house. I opened it slowly. And as I began to read, I wasn't thinking about the storm anymore. Or the cold. Or even the night I had just survived. I was thinking about what came next. Because for the first time since I stepped out into that snow, I wasn't trying to understand what they had done. I already knew. Now, I was deciding what I was going to do about it. Karen placed the final document in front of me and slid a pen across the table. Take your time, she said. I nodded, but I didn't need much time. I had spent the entire night thinking. This was just the formal part. I read every line carefully anyway. Not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to feel it. Every word. Every clause my husband had put in place, years ago, quietly building a wall I didn't even know I would need. Protected ownership. Exclusive authority. Immediate enforcement rights. It was all there. Clear. Undeniable. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had misunderstood the entire foundation they were standing on. I signed my name slowly. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just certain. Karen collected the papers and gave a small, professional nod. This will take effect immediately, she said. If there's anything else you need, legal coordination, notifications, we can assist. I may need that, I replied. She held my gaze for a second longer, then said, You're handling this very well. I didn't respond right away, because, well, wasn't the word I would have chosen. But I understood what she meant. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving. I stood up, gathered my things, and stepped out of the office. The bank felt different on the way out. Not warmer, not brighter, just clearer. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. The sky was still gray, but the storm had passed. Snow covered everything in a smooth, untouched layer. Clean, quiet, deceptive. I stood at the top of the steps for a moment, looking down the street. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. This time, I didn't hesitate. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang once, twice. Then, Whitmore and Hale Realty. The voice was sharp, efficient. This is Margaret Whitmore, I said. I need to speak with someone about a property acquisition. Urgent. A brief pause. Then, one moment, ma'am. A few seconds later, another voice came on. Older. Confident. This is Mr. Hale. I'm calling about a residential property currently under my ownership structure, I said. I want to initiate a transfer of operational control. Immediately. He didn't interrupt. Didn't question. He just listened. Do you have the documentation? He asked. I do. Then we can proceed today. Today. That word felt different now. Not something to wait for. Something to act within. I'll be there within the hour, I said. We'll be ready. The line went quiet. I lowered the phone slowly. There it was. The next step. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Structured. Deliberate. I didn't go back to the house. Not yet. Because walking back too early would only put me in the position they expected. Confused. Hurt. Reactive. No. I needed to meet them from a different place. A place they hadn't prepared for. An hour later, I was sitting in a quiet office across from Mr. Hale. The room smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The kind of place where decisions are made quietly, but carry weight. He reviewed the documents carefully, occasionally adjusting his glasses, flipping pages with precise movements. Finally, he looked up. This is thorough, he said. My husband was a careful man, I replied. That he was, Mr. Hale nodded. With this structure, You have full authority to reassign operational control of the property, including occupancy rights. Occupancy rights. I let that phrase settle. And that can be done immediately, I asked. Yes, he said. With your signature and formal filing, it becomes effective within hours. Hours. Not weeks. Not months. Hours. I leaned back slightly in the chair. Then I'd like to proceed. He studied me for a moment. Not questioning, just observing. May I ask, he said carefully, is there a dispute involved? I met his eyes. Yes, I said. He didn't ask anything further. Just nodded once and turned the documents toward me. Then let's make sure everything is clear and enforceable. The process was quiet. Methodical. Sign here. Initial there. Confirm authority. A series of small actions, leading to one very large shift. By the time we were done, the papers were stacked neatly in front of him. It will be filed within the next hour, Mr. Hale said. Once processed, you will be recognized as the sole controlling authority over the property's occupancy and use. Sole controlling authority. I stood up slowly. Thank you, I said. He gave a small nod. Whatever this situation is, he added, you've handled it correctly. Again, that word. Correctly. Maybe that was closer. Not well. Not easily. But correctly. I stepped outside once more. The air was still cold, but the wind was gone. The world had settled. And somewhere, just a few blocks away, they were probably waking up, drinking coffee, talking quietly, believing the hardest part was already over, believing I was gone. I looked down at my hands. Steady. Then I looked toward the direction of the house. For the first time since last night, I started walking back, not as someone returning, but as someone arriving. The house looked exactly the same. That was the first thing I noticed. Same driveway, same front porch, same curtains slightly pulled to the side in the living room window. If someone had driven past, they wouldn't have seen anything unusual. No sign of what had happened the night before. No trace of the storm that had pushed me out into the dark. Just a quiet suburban home. I stopped at the edge of the walkway and stood there for a moment. Not hesitating, just observing. Because this time, I wasn't walking in as someone who belonged there. I was walking in as someone who understood exactly what that place was and who controlled it. The snow crunched softly beneath my shoes as I stepped forward. Each step measured, deliberate. By the time I reached the front door, I could hear faint movement inside. Cabinet doors opening. Footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. Normal morning sounds. As if nothing had happened. I raised my hand and knocked. Not loudly. Just enough. 3 steady taps. There was a pause. Then footsteps approached. The door opened. Rachel stood there. For a second, she didn't react. Her eyes moved over me slowly. My coat. My face. The fact that I was standing there at all. Not frozen. Not gone. Standing. Alive. Present. What are you doing here? She asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was confused. That told me more than anything else could have. I live here, I said simply. She blinked. Then something shifted in her expression. Not fear. Not yet. But uncertainty. You left, she said. No, I replied. You told me to leave. A small difference. But an important one. Behind her, I saw Daniel step into view. He froze when he saw me. Completely still. Like he hadn't prepared for this version of the morning. Mom, he said. Just one word. But it carried everything he didn't say the night before. I stepped forward slightly. Not pushing past them. Just enough to change the distance between us. I think we need to talk, I said. Rachel's hand moved to the door, gripping it a little tighter. This isn't a good time, she said quickly. I looked at her. Really looked this time. At the tightness in her jaw. The way her shoulders were slightly raised. The way her eyes kept flicking past me, as if checking for something. Or someone. No, I said calmly. This is exactly the right time. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. Daniel stepped closer, his voice lower now. Mom, we didn't expect you back so soon. Soon. There it was again. That word they kept using. As if time had been part of their plan. I didn't expect to leave, I replied. He looked down. Just for a second. Then back at me. We can talk about this later, he said. Let's just calm things down. Calm things down. I almost smiled. Because that's what people say when they've already lost control of the situation. I agree, I said. And then I stepped forward. This time, I didn't stop at the doorway. I walked inside. Rachel didn't move fast enough to block me. Not because she couldn't, but because she wasn't sure if she should. That hesitation, that was the first crack. The house felt warm, comfortable, exactly as it had been before. But I noticed something different now. The way my suitcase was no longer by the stairs. The way a small box sat near the hallway. My things, partially packed. Prepared. Ready. They hadn't just asked me to leave. They had already started removing me. Quietly. Efficiently. Like I was something temporary. I set my purse down on the table and turned to face them. Rachel closed the door behind me slowly. The sound echoed through the room. "Margaret," she said, forcing a polite tone now. "We had an understanding last night." "No," I replied. "You had a plan." Her expression tightened. Daniel shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "That's not fair," he said. "Isn't it?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step closer. I just stood there. Calm. Steady. And that seemed to make them more uneasy than anything else could have. "We were trying to do what's best," Rachel said. "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. Because there wasn't a good answer. Only the truth. And the truth was, this had never been about me. I let the silence stretch just long enough. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a single folder, and placed it on the table between us. Neither of them moved, but their eyes followed it. Carefully. "What is that?" Daniel asked. I looked at him. For the first time that morning, there was no hesitation in my voice. "Clarity," I said. Rachel let out a small breath. "I don't think this is necessary." "It is," I interrupted. Not sharply, just final. Another shift. Another small crack in the space they thought they controlled. "Because whatever you thought was happening here," I continued. "Whatever you thought you were about to finalize," I paused. Let the words settle. Watch their expressions change, just slightly. Recognition. Concern. The beginning of understanding. "You were wrong." Silence. Complete and total. Daniel looked at Rachel. Rachel didn't look back. Her eyes stayed on the folder. Like she already knew that whatever was inside it was going to change everything. Neither of them reached for the folder. They just stood there, watching it. Like it might move on its own. Like opening it would confirm something they weren't ready to face. So I opened it for them. Slowly. Carefully. I slid the top document out and turned it toward Daniel first. He leaned in slightly, his eyes scanning the page. At first, there was nothing. No reaction. Just reading. Then his brow tightened. "What is this?" he asked. His voice had changed. Not confident anymore. Not certain. Rachel stepped closer, trying to see over his shoulder. I didn't say anything. I let the silence do the work. Because silence forces people to think. And thinking is where the truth starts to show. "It's documentation confirming ownership structure," I said finally. Rachel straightened. "We already know the house is—" "No," I interrupted. Still calm. Still steady. "You thought you knew." That stopped her. Completely. Daniel flipped to the second page. Then the third. Faster now. His movements weren't controlled anymore. They were searching. Looking for something familiar. Something that matched what he believed. He didn't find it. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Dad always said—" "Your father said a lot of things," I replied. "But he signed something very specific." Rachel crossed her arms. "What are you trying to say?" she asked. I looked at her. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just clarity. "I'm saying," I said, "that this house has never been yours to control." Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Daniel looked up at me. Really looked this time. As if trying to measure how serious I was. "How is that possible?" he asked. I tapped lightly on the document. "Because the ownership isn't structured the way you think it is," I said. "It never transfers automatically. It never shifts without my approval." Rachel shook her head slightly. "That's not what we were told." "Told by who?" I asked. She didn't answer. Because that answer would reveal too much. And she knew it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room before stopping again. "You're saying we don't have any rights here?" he asked. I considered the question. Chose my words carefully. "You have the right to live here," I said. "As long as I allow it." That was the moment it changed. You could feel it. The shift. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. Rachel's posture stiffened. Her chin lifted slightly. A defensive reflex. "That's not fair," she said. There it was again. Fair. As if fairness had anything to do with what happened last night. Asking me to leave in the middle of a storm wasn't fair either, I replied. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because there wasn't a response to that. Not one that would hold up. Daniel looked between us. Trying to find balance. Trying to fix something that had already broken. "Mom," he said, softer now. We didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't respond right away. Because meaning doesn't change actions. And how far did you mean for it to go? I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Rachel stepped in. We were under pressure, she said quickly. We had to make decisions. Financial ones. You wouldn't understand. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. That shift, from denial to justification. From, it didn't happen, to we had reasons. I understand more than you think, I said. And that was the truth. Because now I saw it clearly. The urgency. The timing. The push. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were trying to secure something before I realized what was happening. And I also know, I continued, that there was an inquiry made at the bank 2 days ago. Daniel froze. Rachel didn't move at all, but her eyes shifted, just slightly, toward him. That was enough. What inquiry? Daniel asked quickly. I held his gaze. The one where you asked about transferring control of this property, I said. Silence. This time, it wasn't just heavy. It was sharp, cutting, because now, there was no space left for misunderstanding. You went behind my back, I said. Not accusing, just stating. He swallowed. It wasn't like that. Then explain it, I said. He couldn't, because there wasn't an explanation that didn't sound exactly like what it was. Rachel stepped forward again, more controlled now, more calculated. We were just trying to understand our options, she said. Our options. As if I wasn't part of that equation. As if I had already been removed. And when you didn't like the answer, I said, you tried a different approach. Her expression hardened. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I replied. I placed my hand lightly on the folder. I'm telling you exactly what happened. Another pause. Then I added, quietly, clearly. You thought if I left it would make things easier. Neither of them denied it. That was the answer. I nodded once. Not in agreement. Just acknowledgement. Because at this point, I didn't need them to admit anything. I already had everything I needed. The documents. The timeline. The truth. I closed the folder slowly. The sound was soft, but it echoed in the room. Like something final. And now, I said, looking at both of them. We're going to talk about what happens next. Daniel didn't say anything. Rachel didn't either. They just stood there, waiting. For me to raise my voice. For me to lose control. For me to turn this into something emotional. Something they could redirect. I didn't. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the dining table. The same table we had dinner at the night before. The same place where they had already decided I didn't belong. Sit, I said. Not loudly. Just clearly. Daniel hesitated for half a second, then sat across from me. Rachel remained standing. Arms crossed. Guarded. That was fine. You said last night this was about space, I began. About privacy. About needing your own life. Neither of them responded. So let's be honest now, I continued. That wasn't the reason. Rachel exhaled sharply. We already told you. No, I said. And this time, there was something different in my tone. Not anger. Authority. You gave me an excuse. I'm asking for the truth. Silence. Daniel looked down at the table. His fingers tapped lightly against the wood, a nervous habit he had since he was a boy. Rachel finally uncrossed her arms and stepped forward. Fine, she said. You want the truth? I met her eyes. Yes. She nodded once. We were trying to move forward, she said. Financially. We've been planning to refinance the house, maybe even leverage it for a better property. But with everything tied up the way it is, she gestured toward the folder. We couldn't do anything. There it was. Not emotion. Not family. Assets. Leverage. Opportunity. And I was in the way, I said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Daniel spoke instead. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, Mom, he said. We just needed time to figure things out. Time. Again. You had time, I replied. 3 years. He didn't respond. Because that was the truth. Rachel stepped in again, more controlled now. We didn't think you'd understand the financial side of things, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded. You're right, I said. That caught her off guard. I didn't understand, I continued. Not at first. I leaned back slightly in my chair. But I do now. Silence. They were listening. Carefully. Because the balance had shifted, and they could feel it. You needed control of the property, I said. Not just access. Control. That's why you went to the bank. That's why you asked about documents. That's why last night couldn't wait. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly. Rachel didn't move. You thought if I left, I continued, it would simplify things. Make it easier to move forward without complications. I let that word sit there. Complications. That's what I had become. Not a mother. Not family. A complication. Daniel finally looked up. We didn't mean it like that, he said. Then how did you mean it? I asked. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Because again, there wasn't a version of this that sounded better out loud. I nodded once. That's what I thought. Rachel straightened slightly. So what now, she asked. Direct. Finally. No more pretending. No more soft edges. Just the question that mattered. I placed both hands flat on the table. Calm. Steady. Now, I said, we correct what happened. Daniel leaned forward slightly. How? I looked at him. At the boy I raised. At the man sitting across from me now. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw both at the same time. Then I answered. You're going to pack your things, I said. Silence. Immediate. Rachel's expression hardened. I'm sorry, she said. You heard me, I replied. Her voice rose slightly. You can't be serious. I didn't react to the tone. Because this wasn't about volume. It was about position. I am, I said. Daniel shook his head. Mom, come on. Let's not make this worse than it already is. Worse. I almost smiled. Because from where I was sitting, this wasn't worse. This was clear. You asked me to leave this house, I said. In the middle of a storm. Without warning. Without discussion. I paused. Let that sit. And now I'm asking you to do the same. Rachel stepped forward, anger rising now. That's not the same thing, and you know it. I tilted my head slightly. Isn't it? She stopped. Because she knew. It was. Daniel ran a hand over his face. This is our home too, he said quietly. I nodded. It was, I corrected. Another shift. Another crack. You still have time, I added. I'm not asking you to leave in the middle of the night. I'm not forcing you into a storm. My voice remained even. Measured. You have until the end of the week. Rachel let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're actually doing this, she said. I didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't something I needed to defend. It was something I had already decided. Finally, I spoke. Yes. Daniel looked at me. Really looked this time. Searching for something. Maybe hesitation. Maybe softness. Maybe the version of me that would change her mind if he just asked the right way. He didn't find it. Because that version had been left outside in the snow. This doesn't have to be like this, he said. I held his gaze. It already is. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't uncertain. It wasn't fragile. It was final. Because for the first time since this began, there were no more questions left. Only consequences. Daniel didn't move. Rachel didn't either. The words had landed, but neither of them was ready to accept them yet. You could see it in the way they stood there. Still. Processing. Resisting. This is ridiculous, Rachel said finally. Her voice was tighter now, sharper than before. You're overreacting. I didn't respond right away. Because calling something an overreaction is often the last defense people use when they've run out of control. I'm not reacting, I said calmly. I'm deciding. That stopped her. Just for a second. Daniel leaned forward, his hands pressed together like he was trying to hold something in place. Mom, he said, softer now, we can fix this. I looked at him. Really looked at him. There was something different in his eyes this time. Not confidence. Not entitlement. Something closer to realization. But realization doesn't undo actions. How? I asked. He hesitated. Because he didn't have an answer ready. Not one that would erase what had already happened. We'll figure something out, he said. Figure something out. I nodded slowly. That's what you said before, I replied. Silence. Rachel stepped in again, more forceful this time. We're not leaving, she said. You can't just come in here and throw us out like this. I turned my attention to her. Steady. You're right, I said. That caught her off guard. I can't just do it without process, I continued. Which is why everything is already in motion. Her expression shifted. What does that mean? It means, I said, that what I told you isn't a discussion. It's a notice. Daniel's head lifted slightly. A notice, he repeated. Yes. I reached for the folder again and opened it, pulling out a second set of papers. These outline the updated authority and occupancy terms, I said. Filed this morning. Rachel took a step closer despite herself. You went behind our backs, she said. I held her gaze. No, I replied. I moved within my rights. Another silence. Heavier this time. Because now it wasn't just words. It was structure, action, reality. Daniel took the papers from my hand, scanning them quickly. His eyes moved faster this time, but not because he understood more. Because he was looking for something that would undo it. There wasn't anything. This is real? He asked. Yes. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I walked in, there was no argument in his expression, just the weight of understanding. Rachel didn't accept it as easily. This doesn't change anything, she said. We live here. We've been living here. You can't just erase that. I nodded once. I'm not erasing it, I said. I'm ending it. Her jaw tightened. You're punishing us. I considered that for a moment. Then I shook my head. No, I said. I'm responding to what you already chose. Daniel lowered himself into the chair across from me again. Slower this time. Like the energy had left him. We didn't think you'd go this far, he said quietly. I looked at him. That's exactly the problem, I replied. He didn't argue. Because he knew. They had expected resistance. Emotion. Maybe even pleading. But not this. Not structure. Not consequence. Not a version of me that didn't ask for permission anymore. Rachel turned away for a moment, pacing toward the kitchen before stopping. Her movements were sharper now, less controlled. This is unbelievable, she muttered. I didn't follow her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't repeat myself. Because everything that needed to be said had already been said. After a moment, she turned back. What if we don't leave? She asked. Direct. Challenging. I met her eyes. Then it becomes a different process, I said. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. The tone was enough. The certainty was enough. Daniel looked between us again, then down at the papers in his hands. His grip loosened slightly, like he finally understood. There wasn't another version of this conversation where he could win. How long? He asked quietly. End of the week, I said. He nodded once. Not agreeing. Just acknowledging. Rachel didn't nod. But she didn't argue either. That was new. The room fell into silence again. But this silence wasn't like the others. It wasn't tense. It wasn't uncertain. It was settled. Like something had finally reached its conclusion. I stood up slowly from the table. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just done. I'll give you space to figure out your next steps, I said. Daniel didn't look up. Rachel didn't speak. I picked up my purse and walked toward the hallway. Each step steady. Familiar. But different. Because I wasn't walking through the house the same way anymore. I wasn't adjusting to it. I wasn't fitting into it. I was moving through something that was already mine. At the end of the hallway, I paused for just a second. Not to look back. Not to check their reactions. But because I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not relief. Something quieter. Final. Then I continued walking. And behind me, for the first time since this began, neither of them tried to stop me. They didn't leave that day. Or the next. Not immediately. And I didn't expect them to. Because leaving a place isn't just about packing boxes. It's about accepting that something has ended. And that takes longer than a conversation at a dining table. The house grew quieter over the next few days. Not peaceful. Just quieter. Rachel stopped moving through the rooms the way she used to. Confident. Certain. Like everything belonged to her. Now, her steps were measured. Careful. As if she was aware, every second, that something had shifted beneath her. Daniel spoke less. He stayed in his room longer. Avoided eye contact when we crossed paths in the hallway. There were no more arguments. No more raised voices. Just the quiet sound of drawers opening. Closets being cleared. Boxes being filled. I didn't interfere. I didn't supervise. I didn't remind them of the deadline. I didn't need to. Because the silence itself was enough. On the third day, I walked into the kitchen early in the morning. The same kitchen where everything had started. Same counter. Same table. Same light coming through the window. But it felt different now. Not because of them. Because of me. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the last of the snow melt along the edge of the driveway. The storm was gone. Completely. All that was left was what it had revealed. Mom. I turned slightly. Daniel was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, shoulders lower than I had ever seen them. I wanted to talk, he said. I nodded once. Go ahead. He stepped inside, slowly, like he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to come anymore. I've been thinking, he said. I didn't respond. I let him continue. About everything, he added. There was a pause. Then, I should have handled it differently. I looked at him. Not surprised. Not moved. Just listening. You think? I said. He nodded. I didn't realize how far it had gone, he admitted. I held his gaze. You didn't realize, or you didn't stop it? That landed. You could see it. The difference between those two things. He didn't answer right away, because the truth was somewhere in between. I thought we had time, he said quietly. Time. Again. I exhaled softly. You had time, I said. You just didn't use it to do the right thing. He looked down. No argument this time. No defense. Just acceptance. I'm sorry, he said. The words were simple, but they came too late to change anything. I nodded once. I know. And I did. Because people don't always mean to cross the line. Sometimes. They just don't stop themselves when they do. Rachel didn't come to talk. Not once. She moved through the house like someone finishing a task. Efficient. Detached. Whatever she felt, she kept it to herself. And that was fine. Because this wasn't about apologies. It wasn't about repairing something that had already been broken at its core. It was about ending it correctly. By the end of the week, the boxes were gone. The rooms were empty again. The hallway felt wider. Quieter. Like it had been holding its breath, and finally let it go. On the last morning, I stood by the front door. The same door I had walked out of in the middle of the storm. My hand rested on the handle for a moment. Not opening it. Just remembering. The cold. The silence. The feeling of being pushed out of something I had given my whole life to build. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I didn't turn right away. I already knew who it was. We're ready, Daniel said quietly. I nodded. Then I opened the door. The air outside was crisp, but calm. No wind. No storm. Just a clear sky stretching above the neighborhood. Rachel walked past me first. Suitcase in hand. Eyes forward. No words. Daniel followed a few steps behind. He paused as he reached the doorway. Just for a second. Take care of yourself, he said. I looked at him. I will, I replied. And that was it. No hug. No long goodbye. Because some endings don't need to be softened. They just need to be clear. I watched them walk down the driveway, step by step, until they reached the street, until they disappeared around the corner. And just like that, the house was quiet again. I closed the door, gently, the same way it had been closed on me that night. But this time, it meant something different. I walked back into the living room and sat down. No noise, no tension, no waiting for something to happen next. Just stillness. People think strength looks loud, like confrontation, like anger, like proving something in the moment. But it doesn't. Not always. Sometimes, strength is standing in the cold, saying nothing, and waiting until the moment comes to walk back in, on your own terms. They thought the storm was the end of my story. That night, standing outside in the snow, with nowhere to go, they thought that was where I would break. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the moment I stopped asking to belong and started deciding where I did. And in the end, I didn't need to fight for the house. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to understand one thing. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're waiting. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you were in that situation, how would you handle it? Please leave a comment to let me know your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more great videos.